welcome back. I'm Pastor Dennis Cummins. Welcome to Truth is Freedom, pastor here of Experience Church. And today we have a couple of guests with us, Mark Herr and Zoe. Pastor Zoe, they are both working with the Center for Self-Governance. And today we're going to be unpacking a little bit more about the domestic violent extremist agenda and how they're weaponizing the government against conservative values and conservative people, and weaponizing even our law enforcement and our surveillance state. And so many people don't understand this. So I want to welcome our guests today, Mark and Zoe. Thank you guys so much for being on. Mark, I understand that you're traveling. You've got some important meetings, but we got you on, so welcome. And Pastor Zoe, thank you for being a part.
Thank you.
So
Thank you so much, Pastor Cummins.
Thank you. Let's unpack this a little bit, because I know a lot of people are still unaware of the proposed House bill that went forward. It didn't get passed, but House Bill 1333, and that would be declaring people domestic violent extremists, especially those with conservative values that are trying to hold the line, and then weaponizing the health department against them. So let's unpack that a little bit, and also kind of what you're doing for the Center of Self-Governance and educating people, helping them understand government structures and state constitutional programs, things like that.
So in Washington State, this past legislative cycle, the legislature was considering creating a commission called the Domestic Violent Extremism Commission. And this was based on a domestic terrorism 2022 study that was put on by Attorney General Bob Ferguson for the state of Washington. And you and I spoke earlier this year, Pastor, about that, and we were able to influence folks about the dangers of this. And the results were that DVE commission was temporarily halted because they didn't have the votes for it. There was so much outcry from the people in the state of Washington about creating a commission that was going to basically be partisan.
Yeah.
Number two is going to rely on faulty FBI, overinflated domestic violent extremism data, and it was going to recommend legislation that would allow health departments and community civic hubs to give family members the ability to report on their family and the community to report on their community. So we had concerns, and we weren't saying that, hey, we want to support domestic violent extremism. We're saying that those words are unclear. This commission seems partisan, and are you using faulty FBI overinflated data? And do we really want to have a state where everyone's reporting on each other? So it becomes possibly a political weapon. Anyway, that was the context of our call or our talk last time, and we were successful at temporarily putting a stop to that commission. Now, that commission is going to be brought back up in January of 2024. And so that's kind of the reason why, Pastor, you and I are having this conversation again, is to start alerting people ahead of time, so we're not reacting, the week of, right? We're going to be several months ahead of this, right? Wise as serpents and gentle as doves.
Yes.
And so we're thinking about this ahead of time. That's the main context of this call today, is to help people understand what's coming and to be prepared for it ahead of time, so they can know what they want to do and how they want to participate come January of 2024.
Yeah, we saw during the COVID lockdowns how quickly people were ready to report family members and friends, and the foreshadowing of using government to stifle our freedoms, our constitutional rights, right? And now we see this proposed House bill that they're going to be going after again. And from what I understand, it looks like they're using the state of Washington as the test bed. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes. So there is another commission. It's called the Hate Commission in Michigan. And the attorney general in that state, I'm trying to remember her first name. Anyway, she was successful at getting the Hate Commission, but the model is essentially the same except for one caveat. And that is this idea of creating a mental health version of this domestic violent extremism commission that would fuse the Department of Health in the state of Washington with the regional health districts and creating a community civic hub, allowing for family members and community members to report on people that they feel are being having their inhibitors destabilized, and then leading them down a pathway to radicalization that would eventually cause them to cross some sort of wall of frustration based on those kind of instances you were just, for example, the COVID-19 lockdowns, et cetera.
Well, and we can already see, and we've seen it in different clips of Congress people on the left side and senators on the left side saying that we're killing people by having conservative values and standing against transition surgery for kids that want to identify as a different gender. And, in other words, they're trying to vilify the conservative people that are rational of thought, saying that there are only two genders. And suddenly we're evil and we're killing people because of our beliefs. And now we are a threat to public health and safety. And this is such a broad scope by which they're doing it. Like you said, it's undefined. But, it's interesting, when he launched the commission and the people that were going to participate in that commission, there were people from the LGBTQ community predominantly, but there was nobody from the Christian community that was going to be on that, representing that.
Yes, that is correct. And this idea that people with a political ideology are somehow should be excluded from these conversations based on these ambiguous definitions of extreme white supremacy, hate, anti-government, that you'll see that language in the domestic terrorism report, that somehow those people should be excluded from the conversation because of their ideological views, being labeled extreme or having that as an extreme view. And so this is the danger of weaponizing labels and weaponizing government, is when the labels are not clear and who those labels specifically apply to. This is really being driven, quite frankly, by several government organizations that were not founded in Washington State, do not have a vested interest in the values of Washington State, and also the political dialogue between Christians and those who share different worldviews, et cetera, and the type of government we have to discuss those differences. We have some external influences that were behind that domestic terrorism study and influencing this domestic violent extremism concept, and not just in Washington State, but across the nation. And that specific organization, which is listed in the domestic terrorism study for Washington State, is the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so our concern is that external influences have these ambiguous definitions, are influencing our state governments to create these partisan commissions based on those definitions in order to silence their political opponents, whether they're Christian, whether they're small business owners, whether they're Muslims. In Michigan, for example, there's a hate commission now created there that's going to target different faiths based on their religious viewpoints. And so this is why I have Zoe. Zoe is our CSG coordinator for the political weaponization of labels. And if it's okay, I'd like to bring him in here so that we can, your listeners can understand. Southern Poverty Law Center is not a government entity, but it is an external influencing our internal Washington political debates.
Yeah, and by
based
design.
on their personal, private political belief systems.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, Pastor Zoe, you've been a filmmaker and a documentarian. You've been on site seeing the government overreach from time to time, that you're trying to package this together and show it to the public. What are you seeing, especially with this SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center? I mean, what a benign name, right? And that's the goal, right? They want people just to kind of look over it. So let's speak to that.
Yeah, and they Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, they have credibility because of their history. They started out fighting the KKK back in the COINTELPRO white hate days, and so because of their relationship with the federal government, they have a certain degree of credibility with law enforcement, and so they have been able to have pervasive, just their doctrine going into our communities to help what I believe is kind of a mutual relationship to help our intelligence agencies and our law enforcement at the federal level to flesh out a term that Congress did not create, a bureaucratic label called domestic violent extremism. And so what they've done is they've created this term that's in the lexicon, the FBI lexicon, extremism, attached it to a term that you find in the Constitution, domestic violence, right? And now you have domestic violent extremism. And that extremism doesn't mean you've actually done anything.
Right.
It could be thought crimes, things you've written, attitudes you've taken. If you support election transparency, or if you think the 2020 election had something happen, or if you don't like the BLM coming in, stealing your cattle without actually, properly serving notice.
The Bureau of Land Management.
Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. If you resist pornography on public school library shelves, then they consider you to be in the category of extremism connected to potential domestic violence. And so they're trying to connect attitudes of people who are proponents of liberty and patriotism, people who, like right now, I think it's apropos that we are having this discussion even today, because this is the anniversary of like the Battle of Athens in Tennessee, where these war military men and women who had gone to war, World War II, when they got home to Tennessee, there were election shenanigans. The mayor and all those folks were just nuts, and they were beating them up, and the government was doing awful things, and so they took matters into their own hands over election integrity, right? And so it's important to understand that that's what our government's looking back at history of revolution, history of people who love liberty, patriots, and that they will stand for their rights. And they're saying that is something anathema. We want them to just obey us.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to take a public health approach rather than come in heavy-handed and try to go after misinformation, disinformation, see if they can come and talk some sense into you Christians, so you'll just go along with having children have their genitals be marred and dismembered, because this is the public health approach. And so it's almost like 1984. It's very Orwellian.
Yes.
How they're trying to adopt almost like a re-education of the American patriot. They don't want these revolutionary ideals that we find actually in the text of our founding documents to actually continue in America anymore. Now, if you believe some of the things the founders wrote, they'll call you a domestic violent extremist, anti-government, white nationalist terrorist.
Well, yeah.
And so SPLC is leading the charge on that, defining DVE for our law enforcement, because obviously Congress is not defining it for them.
And
so
you
they're
said specifically, though, federal, right?
Now the federal government just gave them credibility.
Okay.
So but it's going into our states, it's going into our local,
It is.
and
It
ahead, Mark.
is in our local and state governments, and not just at the federal level, but for example, Attorney General Bob Ferguson, 22 domestic terrorism study relies upon an extremism council member of the SPLC, Cynthia Idris Miller, because of her credibility that is assigned to her for studying what she labels extremism at the various universities that she studies at. And so now, because of that credibility assigned to her and her relationship to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Attorney General, who's the chief law enforcement of the state of Washington, is relying on a nonprofit organization to help guide their decisions on creating this partisan commission with some of the things I described earlier that would be the consequence: reporting on your family, using the Department of Health, treating it as though your extremism that they call extremism,
Right.
it's somehow a mental health problem.
Well, one thing I want to say, though, is
It's merely a federal matter. This is a federal, state, and local matter.
Got it. So one thing, though, and this might be a little sidebar, but what I've witnessed, like Sheriff Troyer, he's the sheriff of Pierce County here, and Bob Ferguson actually went after him with a vendetta, tried to get him charged and tried to get him out with false charges. And so now what we see, though, is, the sheriff is the highest law of the land. And so that's why we see our city councils and our county councils, especially, trying to get rid of the sheriff's position and try to make a hired position, not an elected position, as a chief, so that way they can be pawns of the state and be mandated what to do, rather than the sheriff, which is the highest law and the highest authority of the land in each county.
Yeah, that's right.
That is absolutely spot on. From South Carolina to Washington State, it doesn't matter what the political picture looks like. It is the same modus operandi that SPLC uses to influence the discretion of federal, state, and local law enforcement. So they specifically provide intelligence and training to local law enforcement, like sheriff's departments. And that way, when they interact with them, they are able to identify sheriffs, like the Pierce County Sheriff or other sheriffs around the country, who are not cooperative with this political weaponization of labels and government agenda.
Right.
And so it's not a surprise at all that the Attorney General for the state of Washington would go after him, considering that the Attorney General of Washington was relying on Southern Poverty Law Center in their definitions of extremism, and then encouraging the state government of Washington and the local law enforcement to receive SPLC's training, to use their lists. And even they recommended, Pastor Cummins, they recommended in the report to remove law enforcement officers who fit their definition of extremism. And this is toward the end of that report. So again, I'm not surprised at all that the Attorney General of Washington was going after that sheriff, so that they could create the data point or create the crisis that we have extremist law enforcement, and we need to create commissions and create laws to deal with those so-called extremist law enforcement officers.
Yeah, these are the pieces that we've been trying to shed light on, and how do we communicate to those that are in the free states of the United States, like Texas and Florida and other states that say, well, this will never happen on our soil, and everybody carries a gun, and it's like, how do we communicate that this is coming to a state near you because of the federal influence of what's going on? Either one of you could chime in on that.
Well, I'll first, mine will be really brief, and I'll turn it over to Zoe. It's already happening in Texas and Florida and Idaho, for example. I'll use the neighbor of Washington, Idaho. SPLC has greatly influenced the internal politics of Idaho by labeling State Senator Tammy Nichols as an extremist, by their influence with Antifa, by their providing what's called the community awareness briefing at the University of Idaho in collaboration with the FBI, et cetera. So I would say, Pastor Cummins, this is not unique to Washington State, and so if we could say anything at all, this is our opportunity to unite on stopping the weaponization of labels in government between two states that have politically different cultures, but are being influenced by an organization that has the same agenda. So,
yeah. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where I would say that even apart from SPLC directly giving intelligence and training, they have been training our guys for so long now that they may even have a normalcy bias, that they're seeing things this way. I was talking to one of our Operation FOIA members. He's been FOIAing state and local government, and he made that case to me. Now there are officers who don't even like SPLC, but they're still thinking in the same vein. So they have almost a Stockholm syndrome now.
Yeah. Okay.
They have been trained. It's like the Christians, right? We get saved, we still have some of the old thoughts and emotions, and we got to get our soul bent straight. We believe under the salvation. We got to save the law enforcement. We got to bring some salvation to the executive branch of our state.
Yeah. Well,
because they've been bent the wrong direction now.
Right. Well, I tell you what, we have a serious issue here in the state, no doubt, very serious. And so, what is the next thing that we can do? I can't say what's the solution because it's never that easy, but what can we do now?
Again, I'll split this with Zoe. I'll start first by saying CSG is engaged in Operation FOIA. And in our state, it's called Public Records Request. And the point is to find out all of SPLC's influence on our local and state law enforcement entities. So starting with the Attorney General's office, we would like to see all of the emails and the communications and resources and training materials, et cetera, that they engage with the Attorney General's office. Nothing more than to understand the SPLC's influence on our state politics. Number two is the Pierce County Sheriff's Department, for example. SPLC's influence on your local governments, the training they provide, the intelligence they provide, any subscriptions, communications. And then that's number one.
Okay. We got a little hiccup down.
Explain in great. Specifically for the state of Washington, Operation FOIA helps us identify that SPLC influence and also gives us, Pastor Cummins, the ability to talk about the impending resurgence of this commission in the legislature in January so that people are talking about it and aware of it and become part of the conversation, and they're not caught off guard and reacting to it when it hits in January. And then specifically those two things for Washington State, Operation FOIA, SPLC influence, and then driving this conversation so people are aware that this is going to happen in our legislative cycle upcoming January of 2024. So,
yeah, I mean, Operation FOIA that's a great tool, a great resource. I would also say it's also time for us to begin normalizing relationships with our electeds and the appointeds. It's easy to kind of get into a confrontational political style where everybody's the enemy and we have to take them all out.
Yeah.
But I think it will be in our best interest to be able to have normal relationships with our legislators so that we can be people that they trust to bring this information. We should, as Christians, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, we should be counseling all of our magistrates. I don't know how we dropped that ball, but we should be the magistrates, and if we're not, we should be counseling them, right? The Bible says that 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, don't you know the saints will judge the world? And Romans 13, his ministers bear the sword. Who better than just people to judge and to bear the sword, you know? Imagine if it was a Christian that pulled over George Floyd. You know, poor old Floyd probably would have died anyway. He had enough fentanyl in him to kill a horse. Right. But his last moments would have looked a little different, right?
Yeah, with dignity.
So if we could be in place to counsel and to do the job of even commissions and oversight, then they're getting better intelligence. Right now they're depending on people like NGOs like SPLC, ADL, there's different groups. It's not just the SPLC, but they are right now the leading edge of this kind of domestic violence training of our law enforcement. But if we can become their counselors, if we can become the folks that they can rely on for understanding intelligence, talking with the people, bringing peace to the community, because that's why they're using a public health approach. Of course, they want to overturn our American form of republic, but they're justifying it on trying to keep the peace.
Yeah.
So if we can get in place, be those people, then I think that'll be helpful.
So the FOIA request is, for those that are listening, it's a Freedom of Information Act request. So that way, by law, they have to disclose certain documents to us. But let me just point out the extreme hypocrisy, because really they're the extremists and they're projecting who they are on us. They are the extremists, and they're trying to rewrite America. But let me just say, when it comes to law enforcement, it is absolutely ridiculous that our legislative body has turned their back on local law enforcement. We cannot arrest the criminals. We've tied their hands. We've handicapped the police from being able to do their job. Unless they see the crime happen, they cannot pursue it. They cannot deal with it. So we've got criminals running from cops. They know they're criminals. They're in a stolen car. Our cops are at risk. Okay. So now what they're trying to do, though, is the law-abiding, conservative value families and people they're trying to vilify, and they're trying to get the health department and law enforcement to go after us. And I think this is so dystopian. It's so Orwellian of what is happening today that it's so ostentatious that people can't even grasp what's happening because it's too big. The lie's too big. Just like going back to Nazi Germany and Goebbels, he just said, tell the lie, the bigger the lie, the better the lie, because people would say, no, nobody would make that up.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, 80% of the murders in Chicago are 80% of the murders in Chicago, just as an example, go unsolved.
Yeah.
And they're spending this kind of money and time to try to stop thought criminals.
Exactly.
To your point,
Mark.
and keep this in mind. What we're experiencing is nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Jesus was labeled an insurrectionist, and because the Pharisees and Sadducees loved their influence more than the Jewish people's liberty, they were willing to manipulate them to release a criminal named Barabbas, and they were willing to manipulate the weaponization of government and kill him.
Yep.
So 2,000 years later, it's really important that we understand that we are dealing with human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you might feel like you don't completely understand this, but one thing you know is the story of Jesus being murdered and being an innocent person.
Yeah.
You also know throughout history that people have used labels and then weaponized government for their political agendas. For example, the Germans weaponized the labels parasite and rats to describe the Jews.
Yeah.
And then they weaponized the government to murder them. And here we are today, even though the situation is different and the time is different, it is the same exact human nature playing out before our eyes. And so maybe you feel like I don't completely understand everything and all the details that you're talking about here, but there's one thing I can agree on. I don't want the weaponization of labels in government to happen in my lifetime or to my children or to their children. And if I could, make it stop forever.
That's right.
And this is our opportunity as an American people, not as Democrats or leftists or rightists or Republicans or whoeverists, but as humans to unite to stop the weaponization of labels in government. And that's the primary reason for Operation FOIA. It's the main reason why we're trying to make this case regarding the state of Washington and stopping this. It's not because we want to perpetuate domestic violent extremism.
Right.
Or violent extremist ideas. It's that weaponization of labels in government has a historical precedence, and bring everyone to the table so that we don't repeat history.
Mm-hmm.
So?
Yeah. There's no benefit, I don't think, in giving the government the ability to trespass people's constitutional rights, that a constitution protected God-given rights, for the cause of what they may appear to have intended to do. If they don't have any direct connection that is very clear to some foreign terrorist organization. And they're trying to essentially conflate being in the GOP or the Heritage Foundation or attached to PragerU with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that we're helping them really make this clear that a foreign terrorist organization designated by the Department of State, okay, that's when you may be able to surveil and use some of those tools for counterterrorism. But for American citizens who you know where they live, you know where they work, you don't have to go search for that stuff, okay? They're Mr. Magoo and Amelia Bedelia. Yep. You don't need to use counterterrorism tools on them.
That's right. Well, and, the thing that our church is on board with, we understand that the lawless one is at work. A spirit of Antichrist is at work so the Antichrist can come to power. And so when we talk about Ferguson, look, they really don't care about the LGBTQ community. They're just simply using it to weaponize it against conservative values because it is the church. It is the church. I'm going to say it again. It is the church that they want to stop, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against us. And so this is why we have to keep going, because you know what? In reality, we have lost our freedom of speech. If you can be deplatformed, if they can deplatform the president of the United States, Trump, off of Twitter, we have lost our freedom of speech. We have false fact checkers. I mean, we could just continue on and on. You couldn't speak against the vaccine. You couldn't speak against lockdowns. You couldn't speak against COVID mandates. You couldn't speak, right? And they vilify anybody. And so we got to continue to press.
We're regaining it, though.
Yes.
We are regaining it. And that's the beauty, is that in January of this year, Congress on January 6th created the Weaponization of the Federal Government Committee. And we have been going to Congress with our evidence and not just our complaints of SPLC's influence on the FBI, for example.
Mm-hmm.
The FBI was penetrating the Catholic Church in Richmond, Virginia, using the SPLC's list.
Wow.
And the key was the external influence was mobilizing our government against American citizens, regardless of what you believe.
Yeah.
Whether it's this or that, whatever, is you have this agenda that created credibility, that created access, that mobilized the government. We provided them with evidence of the TSA relying on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list, which organization and Christian organization, whatever organizations, whoever they deem next week's enemy, right? Then by June, they added 300,000 mothers to their list.
Wow.
And so it's not just a political, a partisan, religious, or this or that. It's literally comes down to their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
They have been smart. They have gained access. They have credibility. And they're hiding behind the First Amendment while violating ours. And so we are making a difference. We've gone to Congress 3 times now. We're talking to you about the state of Washington. We were able to slow it down in January. You know what I'm saying? So we are literally making differences by using our voice. No matter how small you think your voice is,
mm-hmm.
your words were designed like Adam to name the animals at a bare minimum, a bare minimum.
Well,
and so I just want to encourage people to use their voice, participate, because we are making a difference.
That's what I want to say is we tried to get the referendum put together against House Bill 5599. That's where the state comes in and takes precedence and calls child abuse anything that stands against the LGBTQ agenda and transitioning, right? And we were 50,000 signatures short. We should have had 200,000 signatures, and we were short 50,000. That says to me that more people need to get off the rear ends and get to work. More people need to take ownership and not just think, well, other people are doing it, other people are going, other people are getting involved. And, you know, our experience of what we've found, you know, even people being approached to sign the petitions, they're scared. They're absolutely scared. They don't want to do anything. I don't want my name out there. And this has got to stop. People have to get some stones. They got to get some bravery. They got to get they got to be willing to fight for their freedom, or they're going to secede it. And so that's where I want to say, praise God that we are making some headway, but it's not enough, and we need more people to engage. We need more people to get involved. It's not enough just to sit there and expect somebody else to do it. So thank you, guys. I really want to say thank you so much for taking your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing, and we're with you. And so that means that we as a church, we're going to be a part of this FOIA request. We got to protect our freedoms, and we're going to stand. So let's continue on.
Great.
Yeah,
that's great.
hopefully...
We have so many people. Go ahead, Zoe.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Joe.
no, it's okay. Please. No, I was going to say I'd like to invite you tonight.
It's the delay. That's okay. Zoe, go ahead and you can finish, and then I'll let Mark have the last word.
Oh, I was just going to say I'd like to invite you and your crew, your church tonight, if you can. We're actually having a meeting, a Zoom call. It's not for public. It's not for everybody in the world, but we would love to have you if you want to participate.
Thank you, Mark.
I want to echo what Zoe is saying. Is that we had a meeting on Tuesday with 25 states represented for Operation FOIA. And the whole point of this effort is that it's not a partisan thing. We're uniting to stop the weaponization of labels in government, whether it was Jesus and the Pharisees or whether it was the Jews and the Germans. It doesn't.
Right.
And in this case, We're having another meeting tonight to further, if people want to join to participate in learning what they can do. And then I want to complete it by saying we're going to DC in September. All we're doing is bringing our evidence of SPLC's influence based on what we've been doing since March to show that SPLC, yes, they have a First Amendment right to call me whatever name they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when they start mobilizing government to violate my civil liberties, that is a problem. I respect their First Amendment, but I do not want Puritans labeling me a heretic and a witch and then dunking me in the water to see if I drown.
Yep.
Not in the 21st century.
That's right. That's right. Well,
Yeah,
thank
man.
you.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's Truth is
Thank you,
Freedom.
Dr.
Absolutely. That's Truth is Freedom. Thank you for being a part. Don't forget, like, subscribe, share this out. Let other people know what's happening. So many people are living under a rock. They don't know what's happening. And this is just another way to get this information out. And there's more information coming on this topic. So thank you, and God bless.